Welcome to Sisters Inc., our podcast for and about women business owners, brought to you by Black Enterprise. I'm your host, Elisa Gomes. Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America. And on every episode, we sit down with one successful CEO and share how she slays the challenges of being a Black woman in business. Today's episode is all about crafting a successful retail strategy. We're chatting with Aisha Taylor Issah, founder and CEO of the Sisters in Business Expo and the Sistah Shop, which is both an e-commerce and a brick-and-mortar destination highlighting women of color owned brands. Welcome to Sisters Inc., Aisha, and thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you so much, Elisa. I don't know why I'm getting a little emotional with that intro. I think it's because it's coming from you, someone that I have just loved and admired for so long, and so grateful for our connection. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You are a longtime part of the Black Enterprise family. On top of being a successful women entrepreneur, on top of being a great collaborator, friend soror to me. And so I really am excited for you to be able to share all of the things that you have learned on your entrepreneurial journey with our audience. So why don't you start by telling us about the Sisters in Business Expo and why you chose to start it?
Yeah, journey is definitely the appropriate word because has in fact been and continues to be a journey. So the Sisters in Business Expo was launched actually back in 2017. That was when we first announced the brand. And it really just came out of a need that I experienced myself as a Black woman entrepreneur, wanting to have opportunities to showcase my then business, which was a service based business, tailor made career consulting, and not really finding a lot of spaces to do that that didn't come at an astronomical cost or were hard to get access to or get in. And at the time, there had been this buzz about, Black women entrepreneurs being the largest and fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the country. But when you dug a little deeper, that's when you learned that we're also the least funded, least supported, least likely to scale. And so those things just didn't sit right with me. And that is how the Sisters in Business Expo was birthed. I wanted to create something that I wish I had when I started my first business so many years ago.
And why did you decide to include a retail component to that in the form of the Sister Shop?
So I will tell you that was not me. That was all God. When we first started the Sisters in Business Expo brand in 2017, retail was never on our radar. It honestly was nothing that I ever envisioned, but it really is a testimony to the fact that sometimes God has plans for you that you didn't even have for yourself. And so in 2021, actually, late 2020, when we were dealing with the pandemic and trying to figure out the future of our brand, we could not hold our live events, which we were prominently known for, going over a year. And we're trying to figure out what was next. How are we going to continue to support women of color entrepreneurs while also keeping our company alive? And retail was the answer. And so in January of 2021, after just a long session with me and Jesus, like, Lord, I know you didn't bring us this far to bring us this far. What should we do? He just gave me this idea and this vision to go into the world of retail so that we could still have a space where sisters could showcase their products and services, which is what we were always about. At the time, of course, retail, had taken a hit because of the pandemic. And so there were a lot more opportunities to get back into retail. Companies and retail property managers were extending, opportunities to smaller businesses. And so we took advantage of that and opened our first store in April of 2021. And it completely changed the trajectory of our brand. And so that's really how we got to retail.
In this retail environment, many people shy away from brick and mortar stores. What made you choose to pursue that path?
Yeah, it was really a risk. It was really a risk. But at the time, it was right because of the opportunities that were being provided given the pandemic. At a previous time, we probably would not have been able to get into the resource spaces that we were in and are in. But at that time, timing really is everything. And at that time, it was the right fit for us. It was the right opportunity. Folks were beginning to come back outside. And at the time we were in the New York, New Jersey area where they did not play. Everything was shut down. But malls were the first things to open back up. And so they were flooded with people who just wanted to get outside. And so that was really ultimately how we made the decision to go into retail despite the risks that are associated with it. We knew that if we could do it and do it right, then it really could be a benefit to all of the sisters that we serve. And it has, in fact, been that.
So you mentioned that you had a retail store in New Jersey. You also have one in Atlanta. Both of them are in malls.
Mhm.
And it was an opportunity that you couldn't pass up. But when you were thinking about opening stores, what was your decision making process like around locations, whether it was cities, whether it was, the actual locations within the city for the site? How did you work that through?
Yeah. So we definitely wanted to go into areas where we already had an audience, right? So we already had a very strong audience in the northern New Jersey area because that is where we launched. That's where we held our first ever Sisters in Business Expo and had been doing so for every year since then. And the same was true when we decided to open up a location in Atlanta. We already had an audience there. So we knew we wanted to go into spaces where we already had an audience. We already had a pretty good following, and we knew there was a market for our target demographic, which is women of color entrepreneurs. And so that was the easy part. Finding the actual location within the city was a little bit more difficult, but we were blessed. We were blessed to be able to get spaces that were prime retail, in very well attended, well trafficked malls. And so those were things that we definitely took into consideration. So had it not been that, so had it not been, a good location within the mall, or a mall that was like dying and not still had a good audience, then we probably would not have gone there. But we had a history of choosing locations for our events. So we used a lot of the knowledge that we learned from that when it came time to choose locations for our retail stores.
Hindsight is always 2020. And so from this point looking back, what are some of the things you wish you knew then that you know now when you were opening your first
Ooh,
store?
child. That is a long list. Literally, we have learned the world of retail from the bottom up. Like, this has been a very grassroots, learn as you go, hands-on type of training. There was nothing to teach us, right? You can read online, of course, but I didn't have a degree in retail. Aside from being an entrepreneur and knowing how to run a business, retail was its own animal. And so a lot of it we learned as we went along. And as a result, there were a lot of mistakes made. What I wish I knew now, and even some of these things I was able to apply when we opened our second location, right, is that sometimes less is more. We think that we need the largest space. So we think that we need the most extravagant decor or the most extravagant, fixtures, or, all the things that we think aesthetically look nice, while in the long run, they really don't matter much, right? Like, that we care more about them than customers do. And we learned that because, we would spend money on some things and think it would be so impressive. And the customers were like, let me get this body butter. Let me get this candle. Like, they really were concerned more about the products. And so even when opening our second location, we definitely took that into consideration, and were able to cut our costs and our spending on some of the things that weren't as important as we initially thought they were.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make. One of my favorite entrepreneurs always says that you should start lean. She's like, if you are starting a bakery, spend your money on flour and sugar and butter and eggs. Don't spend your money on cute aprons and,
Listen.
curtains for the windows. But when we open up a store, especially in a mall, I'm sure that you feel a pressure to compete with, bigger stores.
Yes and no. I think that we were right next to Michael Kors, right across from the Gap and Banana Republic, like all of these huge, big name retailers. And so, but we knew that we brought something so unique to the mall. Right, like there was no store like ours that existed. The experience that we brought was extremely unique. The offerings that we brought were so unique. So we really felt proud that in that sense we didn't have to compete because we weren't selling the same types of things. We were not offering the same types of experiences or the same types of products. And so we really, have taken pride in that, and that we've crafted something really special that allows us to stand out amongst the big box retailers, amongst the high end brands, and even, your everyday kind of Old Navy and those kind of stores. We are such a unique experience, and that part we know we don't have to compete with.
You have a hybrid approach in your retail stores. You sell brands on consignment, but you also host pop up markets
Yes.
on the weekends where the women vendors can come in and sell their goods themselves. Tell us what's behind that strategy.
Yeah. Again, we wanted to be able to stay similar to what we were doing with our events. Right. And so when COVID happened, and people couldn't host live events, a lot of the vendors who normally, would participate in trade shows or expos like ours were suffering, because those types of events are what, were a large part of their revenue streams. We also knew that everyone wasn't going to be ready for retail. Right. Maybe they're just starting out, maybe they can't handle the inventory, or their branding is not ready, whatever the case might be. But we still wanted to provide an opportunity for them to be able to showcase their products and services. So that is why we went with that hybrid approach, and allowing folks to still come in on the weekends to pop up as they would at an expo to showcase their products and services. And it has worked really well. It also allows us to expose our audience to even more brands, right? In addition to the ones that they see on our shelves every day, they get to meet and greet and connect with the brands that come on the weekends. And so that was really the thought process behind having that hybrid approach.
Let's go deeper into the concept of ready for retail, because I know that there are certain things that you look for in your vendors. And if you could share with us, either a checklist or the thinking behind it, but what makes a brand ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's really important, because we consider ourselves really like a gateway to retail, right? Because so many people are, they think Target, they think Walmart, those are the stores they want to get into, but sometimes they may not be ready for that, but they might be ready for the Sistah Shop. And so some of the things that we look for are just first and foremost a solid brand. Right? Like, it needs to be clear and consistent in terms of who you are, what your brand represents, what you offer, and what you sell. And so we encourage our sisters. We work with them to, kind of clean up their branding, to get their brand consistent. We have vendors that can help them, in their logo design, in their website design, that kind of thing. But a clear brand message is really, really important, as well as their presence online, right? Like, you can't come to the Sistah Shop as a completely new brand, right? Like, you have to have a proven concept. You have to have somewhat of an audience. We're not expecting you to have hundreds of thousands of followers, but we do need to know that you have a proven concept, that you've already been doing the work, and that going into retail is a next step for your business. And so those are some of the things that we look for when evaluating what products we will allow in the store.
So when you talk about brand consistency, are you just talking about the look? Are you like, does your Facebook page and your website look like it belongs to the same company? Or are you talking about, what they make? Like, are you a travel brand, but instead of making water bottles, I don't know, you're making pots and pans? Like,
Yes.
it's,
All of those
it's
things, all of those things, because as Black women, we do so many things, and sometimes we try to put everything in the pot when we're creating our businesses, and that usually is a recipe for disaster. And so, yes, it needs to be a clear brand across your social media platforms, across your website, and all of that. But then also your product offerings, right? Because if you are on our shelves as a consignment vendor, then yes, this is a product based business, and so we want to be sure that your products are in alignment with your brand. If you do have something different, then maybe that needs to come under a different brand, and you might have two brands in the store, but definitely it needs to be a clear and concise, message across your different products. And I did want to mention also, when we talked about why we went with the weekend vendors, and one important piece that I forgot to mention was that we also really like to include service-based businesses. So that has been a pillar for our brand since our expos started, that even at our expos, we didn't want it just to be product based. We wanted to have a space where service based businesses could also showcase what they do, because as someone who owned a service-based business, I know how tough it is to get into those types of arenas and be able to, stand neck and neck with someone who's actually selling a product, but feeling like you were a part. And so that having those weekend vendors helped us to also be able to do that in our retail space. So we do oftentimes have service-based businesses who come in on the weekends and can share more about what they do with the audience.
Do you also sort of look for people with a history of some of these markets behind them, or do you have like a training program that helps them get to learn their customers and what they're really looking for from them?
So we don't have a requirement where you have had to participate in an expo or a market before. In fact, that's one of the things that we're proud of, which is that for a lot of times, a lot of our vendors, we're the first expo they've ever done. We hear that a lot. They're like, "This is my first expo. This is my first." A lot of times they say, "This is my first big event," and so we're proud. We're proud to be, the one who can break them into these types of experiences, to be a learning ground for them, a training experience for them. We do provide a lot of resources, a lot of tips and strategies on, how to best set up your vendor booth and, what things you should do to prepare through our Sisters in Business University, which is another part of our brand. We do more teaching on training on how to start, grow, or scale your business. Then Like a Pro is one of the courses that we offer. So we definitely try to make sure that they are prepared, but we're always proud to welcome newbies.
You also have an e-commerce site. I know we've been talking about brick and mortar a lot, but e-commerce is just as important, if not more so, because it can reach a global audience. What's the learning curve been like for you for selling stuff online?
Yeah. So we have a long history of e-commerce. We actually launched e-commerce back in 2019, right after the year after we held our first expos, because at the events, like all of our staff had our custom shirts on, and everybody was like, "Well, where can I get one?" And we was like, "We don't know." So we immediately knew that we needed to add an e-commerce side for our merchandise, right? So we had to learn e-commerce in that arena just by selling our own merchandise. But then when we opened the store and brought on ultimately, up to 150 brands, that completely changed the landscape of our e-commerce knowledge. And so we had to completely redesign the back end of the website, as well as the front end, to be able to have all of these products. We have over 1,000 SKUs, literally thousands of SKUs on our website from over 150 brands. So it has been a huge learning curve. It has been a huge learning curve. Thankfully, God has surrounded me with people who are smarter than me, who have helped to helped us navigate this. And we're still learning today. Like literally, we're always tweaking the site, always making edits and changes. I've had calls as early as this week, with our e-commerce manager, just about what we can do to enhance the experience on our e-commerce site. Ultimately, we are considering ourselves to be the Amazon of Black women-owned brands, and so we want our experience online to feel like that, and we're working hard to get there every day.
Anyone I think who's ever tried to establish an online presence knows how difficult it can be to get eyeballs
Yeah.
to your site to begin with. And that's before you even get into what is the experience like for the customer, the logistics of online payments, the safety and security issues, the shipping issues.
All the issues.
Are there tactics you can share that have worked really well for your site?
Yeah, I think that, investing early on in the software and or the personnel to create and build your software is very paramount. Now, of course, most people have to start where they are, right? Doing it themselves. But even in that, there are so many resources out there now that were not out there even 5, 10 years ago, right? Through the platforms like, Shopify and Square and e-commerce and WooCommerce and others, right? So taking advantage of those resources that are there, watching the training videos, implementing what they're telling you to do, so that with what you have, your customers can have the best experience. We also find it very helpful to watch our site like a hawk, right? So you don't want to build a site and then just walk away from it and think that everything is going to be okay. Links break, pages have errors, there are typos. Like, you want to be watching your site, testing it out, testing out links, being very in tune with what is happening on your site, going to it and visiting it as a customer so that you can see what their experience is. Then you can identify the parts that need to be fixed, things that should be changed or enhanced. Those are all things that have helped us to really enhance our e-commerce component.
You mentioned that with brick and mortar, as the owner, you all originally thought that there were some things that were more important than they are. A larger space, better decor, when the customers really only cared about the products. Is that similar in the e-commerce space? Do the customers really only care about the products, or there are
No.
some things that you're like, no, we got to get this right?
No, in fact, it's the exact opposite. So in e-commerce, aesthetics matters, right? Like, the user interface is more important than the actual products on the site, right? We see that with, some of these, big name sites that have a million products on them, like your Shein or your Temu, or, those kind of sites, right? Where you would think it would be difficult to navigate, but because the user interface is so sophisticated, a lot of times what they're selling is junk, right? But we want it because the site works well, the price is good, right? So online, it is definitely a different approach. It's all about aesthetics. It's all about user interface. You want to have ease of experience from beginning to end. You want to make the customer journey simple, and then of course a lot of follow up, right? So things like those win back emails, those abandoned carts, all of those pieces are integral as well. So you have to look at it from a holistic perspective, and not just about what happens in the moment when the customer comes to the site, but what happens while they're on the site and when they leave the site. And so there's a lot of factors, a lot of layers into building a successful e-commerce component.
It also, though, has the upside of producing a lot of data, which I think that probably most small business owners don't take enough
Yeah.
advantage of it. How has that affected how you approach the site moving forward?
Yeah.
Like the feedback that you
Such a
collect?
great question. Data is literally everything. Like, data has to be what drives your decision making, and it took a while for us to learn that, right? Because we go off of feeling, we go off of, oh, somebody said they like that shirt, like, let's put that at the top of the page. But then when you go look, that ain't the shirt that everybody's looking at or buying. And so we've been really intentional about paying close attention to our data, weekly data, meetings and reports, studying and analyzing what pages people are going to, what items, where they're falling off of the site, what pages they're spending the most time on, things like where your customers are, the demographics of the customers, even like what types of devices they're using. Like, all of these things help you to stay informed and drive your decision making, when you're deciding, what changes or enhancements to make to your experience. And that goes for the brick and mortar and the e-commerce side. Thankfully, platforms like Shopify give you data on both sides. So it's been everything.
You mentioned that your initial foray into e-commerce was with your own products. Well, way back pre-pandemic
Yes.
in 2019 now, because people saw them and they wanted
Yeah.
them. What have you learned over these past 5 years about designing items to sell, choosing which items to sell, whether that's product selection or pricing or any other aspect?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll tell you this: people talk a lot, but they don't buy as much as they talk. So like I said, everybody was like, oh, I love that shirt. Where can I get that shirt? So we're like, oh, let's put the shirt out. We put the shirt out, and maybe like three people bought it. And I know that that is something that a lot of entrepreneurs will resonate with, right? Like, people say that they like something, they say that they want to buy it, but then when you put it out there, they don't buy it. And that can be one of the most hurtful things. And so we've had to learn to take the emotion out of business, right? Because it is not about your emotions. It is about what the data is saying and what is actually working and what isn't. I have lots of ideas for designs, right? So we started with one shirt. We went to two, three, four. I think I don't even know how many we have now, maybe over 50. Some we have, gotten rid of over time and phased out. We launched new ones, every other season or so. But it really comes down to what is received, what our audience is interested in. We do a lot of listening. We try to get a lot of feedback. That's one thing that retail has been amazing about, is being able to hear firsthand from the customers on what they like and what they don't like, right? Or hearing, oh, this would be great in this color, but how many times have I heard that, right? Like if just one person said it, then maybe not. But if I've heard from so many people that we should have this, I could give you an example. So for the longest time, we only had mom and dad themed merch. Right. So we had a shirt that said dopest dad ever. And we had a shirt that says Black Mama Magic. And so those were, some of our top sellers. But we kept hearing from customers, what about grandparents? Right? Like grandparents need something. We need something for grandparents. And I didn't move immediately. Even though the staff was like, people are saying this. I'm like, let's see. Let's kind of give it some time. And then over time, after we continued to get that request, we launched a design for grandparents, and it has done well. But those are the types of things that being in retail is helpful too. But even if you're not, you can get that data from your e-commerce audience, through surveys and email newsletters and things like that, and doing vending shows. It's really important to hear from your audience. When it comes to design, we don't play about design. From the very beginning, I know what my strengths are, and I know I'm not a designer. I might have great ideas, but I cannot bring them to fruition. And so we have an amazing brand design and web manager who does all of our graphic design, all of our t-shirt designs, all of our apparel designs. And so I really think that there's value in investing in high quality design. One of the, I would say, downsides to some of the technology is that people think they can do everything themselves. And I would beg to differ. I can always tell what a shirt was or a design was done by an amateur versus someone who's a professional. But you do what works for you. You start where you are. But I do think at some point you should invest in professional design.
Any lessons learned around pricing your goods?
Yes. First of all, we as Black women are often underpricing ourselves. And I think we started that way too, thinking that if we wanted people to buy it, we had to make it cheap. But I think that value is perceived, right? And so by making your items cost less, that can be perceived that it is of not of great quality, or not, high value, or not luxury. And so you have to really set your price, first of all, at something that's going to make you profitable. So again, this goes back to knowing your numbers, so your cost of goods, and not just the shirt itself, but the design, the time it took you, the machine that you are using to do, like all of those factors have to go into setting a price. If you have staff, how much you're paying them, so making sure that you are at least profitable, but then also having a price that is commensurate with your brand's kind of value overall. If you're calling yourself a luxury brand, then you should have luxury quality products and prices to match that. If you're more of kind of an everyday, middle income type brand, then your prices should reflect that. But whatever you do, don't undermine your prices because you feel like that's the only way that people will purchase. People pay for what they want. And we have learned, and also you have just like your rent goes up, just like your mortgage goes up, just like your Netflix goes up, right? Your prices should too, because the costs of things are going up every year. So if you've been charging $20 for your t-shirt since you launched 3 years ago, you're probably losing money. And if your customers are really your audience, they will rock with you.
Well, as someone who sells over 500 brands between your virtual and your in real life shopping platforms, I'm going to let you close on this. What is your best advice for other women entrepreneurs about how they can craft their own retail strategy?
First of all, be very prayerful. Retail is not easy, but it is possible. But it's definitely going to take a higher power than your own to navigate some of those difficult days, those slow seasons, right? I think another huge piece of advice is preparing for the slow seasons, right? Like every month is not going to be like November and December. In fact, there are several that are not, but If you plan ahead, if you prepare for the slow seasons, if you don't overspend in the months that you're doing well, then you'll be better prepared for those months when you won't. Retail is such an ebb and flow. It is so unpredictable. There are so many factors that can contribute to your revenue, right? Things like the weather, things like breaking news or large events, like if the president's coming into town and all the streets are shut down, like things that you don't even think about can really impact your revenue in retail. But I always encourage people to keep going. Do not give up. Don't let a slow month or a slow season get you off track. Remember why you started, and diversify your revenue stream. So if you're only relying on folks coming through those doors to shop, then you're probably going to have a difficult time. But if you have an e-commerce side, if you're using your space maybe to host events or to open it up to the community for other things, if you're doing some coaching and some training, like you have to diversify your income so that you can survive the tough times.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for sharing your
Oh,
small
one
business
more.
success story. Oh, one more.
Have excellent customer service. I cannot
Oh,
I cannot stress enough how important that piece is, because people remember how you treated them. They remember how they felt when they walked into your doors. And so we take so much pride in providing excellent customer service to our audience. Whether they buy something or not, you are treated like royalty when you come into the Sistah Shop. And I really think that can take a retail space a long way.
yeah. Thank you again. Everyone out there, please take a look at the company websites, sistasinbusinessexpo.com and thesistahshop.com. And in both websites, that's spelled Sistah. You can
Yes.
also follow them on Facebook at Sisters in Business Expo and on Instagram at SIB Expo. Check out the podcast channel on blackenterprise.com to find Sisters Inc. and other podcasts from Black Enterprise editors, writers, and experts. Be sure to subscribe to Sisters Inc. on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you like what you hear, show us some love by leaving a 5-star review or put a sister on by spreading the word. I'm Elisa Gums with Sisters Inc. for Black Enterprise. Thank you for listening.